Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more philosophy. Today we are diving back into the works of Georg Hegel. This is the science of logic. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the science of logic with part 3, chapter 1, I think, concrete existence. Just as the principle of sufficient reason says that whatever is has a ground, or is something posited, something mediated, so there would also have to be a principle of concrete existence, saying that whatever is exists concretely. The truth of being is to be, not an immediate something, but essence that has come forth into immediacy. But when it was further said that whatever exists concretely has a ground and is conditioned, it also would have to be said that it has no ground and is unconditioned. For concrete existence is the immediacy that has come forth from the sublating of the mediation that results from the connection of ground and condition, and which, in coming forth, sublates this very coming forth. Inasmuch as mention may be made here of the proofs of the concrete existence of God, it is first to be noted that besides immediate being that comes first, and concrete existence, or the being that proceeds from essence, that comes second, there is still a third being, one that proceeds from the concept, and this is objectivity. Proof is, in general, mediated cognition. The various kinds of being require or contain each its own kind of mediation, and so will the nature of the proof also vary accordingly. The ontological proof wants to start from the concept. It lays down as its basis the sum total of all realities, where under reality also concrete existence is subsumed. Its mediation, therefore, is that of the syllogism, and syllogism is not yet under consideration here. We have already commented above on Kant's objection to the ontological proof, and have remarked that by concrete existence, Kant understands the determinate immediate existence, with which something enters into the context of total experience. That is, into the determination of being an other, and of being in reference to an other. As an existent concrete in this way, something is thus mediated by an other, and concrete existence is, in general, the side of its mediation. But in what Kant calls the concept, namely something taken only as simply self-referring, or in representation as such, this mediation is missing. In abstract self-identity, opposition is left out. Now, the ontological proof would have to demonstrate that the absolute concept, namely the concept of God, attains to a determinate existence, to mediation, or to demonstrate how simple essence mediates itself with mediation. This is done by the just mentioned subsumption of concrete existence under its universal, namely reality, which is assumed as the middle term between God in his concept on the one hand, and concrete existence on the other. This mediation, inasmuch as it has the form of a syllogism, is not at issue here. As already said, however, that mediation of essence and concrete existence truly comes about. This is contained in the preceding exposition. The nature of the proof itself will be considered in the doctrine of cognition. Here, we have only to indicate what pertains to the nature of mediation in general. The proofs of the existence of God adduce a ground for this existence. It is not supposed to be an objective ground of the existence of God, for this existence is in and for itself. It is therefore solely a ground for cognition. It thereby presents itself as a ground that vanishes in the subject matter that at first seems to be grounded by it. Now the ground which is derived from the contingency of the world entails the regress of the latter into the absolute essence, for the accidental is that which is in itself groundless and self-sublating. In this way, therefore, the absolute essence does indeed proceed from that which has no ground. For the ground sublates itself, and with this there also vanishes the reflective shine of the relation that was given to God, that it is grounded in another. This mediation is therefore true mediation. But the reflection involved in that proof does not know the nature of the mediation that it performs. On the one hand, it takes itself to be something merely subjective, and it consequently distances its mediation from God himself. On the other hand, for that same reason, it also fails to recognize its mediating movement, that this movement is the essence itself and how it is there. The true relation of reflection consists in being both in one, mediation as such, but, of course, at the same time a subjective, external mediation. That is to say, a self-external mediation which in turn internally sublates itself. In that other presentation, however, concrete existence is given the false relation of appearing only as mediated or posited. So, on the other side, concrete existence also cannot be regarded merely as an immediate. Taken in determination of an immediacy, the comprehension of God's concrete existence has been declared to be beyond proof, and the knowledge of it an immediate consciousness only, of faith. Knowledge should arrive at the conclusion that it knows nothing, and this means that it gives up its mediating movement, and the determinations themselves that have come up in the course of it. This is what has also occurred in the foregoing, but it must be added that reflection, by ending up with the sublation of itself, does not thereby have nothing for result, so that the positive knowledge of the essence would then be an immediate reference to it, divorced from that result and self-originating, an act that starts only from itself. On the contrary, the end itself, the foundering of the mediation, is at the same time the ground from which the immediate proceeds. In Zugrundgehang, the German language unites, as we remarked above, the meaning of foundering and of ground. The essence of God is said to be the abyss, Abgrund in German, for finite reason. This it is, indeed, insofar as reason surrenders its finitude therein, and sinks its mediating movement, but this abyss, the negative ground, is at the same time the positive ground of the emergence of the existence, of the essence, immediate in itself. Mediation is an essential moment. Mediation, through ground, sublates itself, but does not leave the ground standing under it, so that what proceeds from it would be a posited that has its essence elsewhere. On the contrary, this ground is, as an abyss, the vanished mediation, and, conversely, only the vanished mediation is at the same time the ground, and only through this negation, the self-equal and immediate. Concrete existence, then, is not to be taken here as a predicate, or a determination of essence, of which it could be said in a proposition. Essence exists concretely, or it has concrete existence. On the contrary, essence has passed over into concrete existence. Concrete existence is the absolute self-emptying of essence, and emptying that leaves nothing of the essence behind. The proposition should therefore run: essence is concrete existence. It is not distinct from its concrete existence. Essence has passed over into concrete existence, inasmuch as essence as ground has no longer distinguishes itself from the grounded, or inasmuch as the ground has sublated itself. But this negation is no less essentially its position, or the simply positive continuity with itself. Concrete existence is the reflection of the ground into itself, its self-identity as attained in its negation. Therefore, the mediation that has posited itself as identical with itself, and through that, is immediacy. Now, because concrete existence is essentially self-identical mediation, it has the determinations of mediation in it, but in such a way that the determinations are, at the same time, reflected into themselves and have essential and immediate subsistence. as an immediacy which is posited through sublation. Concrete existence is negative unity and being within itself. It therefore immediately determines itself as a concrete existent and as thing. A. The thing and its properties. Concrete existence, as concrete existent, is posited in the form of the negative unity which it essentially is. But this negative unity is, at first, only immediate determination, hence the oneness of the something in general. But the concretely existent something is different from the something that exists immediately. The former is, essentially, an immediacy that has arisen through the reflection of mediation into itself. The concretely existent something is thus a thing. The thing is distinct from its concrete existence, just as the something can be distinguished from its being. The thing and the concrete existent are immediately one and the same, but because concrete existence is not the first immediacy of being, but has the moment of mediation within it, its further determination as thing and the distinguishing of the two is not a transition, but truly an analysis. Concrete existence, as such, contains this very distinction in the moment of its mediation, the distinction of thing in itself and external concrete existence. A. The thing in itself and concrete existence. 1. The thing in itself is the concrete existent as the essential immediate that has resulted from the sublated mediation. Mediation is, therefore, equally essential to it, but this distinction in this first or immediate concrete existence falls apart in two indifferent determinations. The one side, namely the mediation of the thing, is its non-reflected immediacy, and hence its being in general. And this being, since it is at the same time determined as mediation, is an existence which is other to itself, manifold and external within itself. But it is not just immediate existence. It also refers to the sublated mediation and the essential immediacy. It is therefore immediate existence as unessential, as positedness. When the thing is differentiated from its concrete existence, it is then the possible, the thing of representation, or the thing of thought, which as such is at the same time not supposed to exist. However, the determination of possibility and of the opposition of the thing and its concrete existence comes later. But the thing in itself and its mediated being are both contained in the concrete existence, and both are themselves concrete existences. The thing in itself exists concretely and is the essential concrete existence, but the mediated being is the thing's unessential concrete existence. The thing in itself, as the simple reflectedness of the concrete existence within itself, is not the ground of unessential existence. It is the unmoved, indeterminate unity, for it has precisely the determination of being the sublated mediation, and is therefore the substrate of that existence. For this reason, reflection, too, as an immediate existence which is mediated through some other, falls outside the thing in itself. The latter is not supposed to have any determinate manifold in it. For this reason, it obtains it only when exposed to external reflection, though it remains indifferent to it. The thing in itself has color only when exposed to the eye, smell when exposed to the nose, and so on. Its diversity consists of aspects which another picks out, specific points of reference which this other assumes with respect to the thing in itself, and which are not the thing's own determinations. Now, this other is reflection, which, determined as external, is first external to itself and determinate manifoldness. Second, it is external to the essential concrete existent and refers to it as its absolute presupposition. These two moments of external reflection, its own manifoldness and its reference to the thing in itself as its other, are however one and the same. For this concrete existence is external only insofar as it refers to the essential identity as to an other. The manifoldness, therefore, does not have an independent subsistence of its own besides the thing in itself, but over against it, it is rather only as reflective shine. In its necessary reference to it, it is like a reflex, refracting itself in it. Diversity, therefore, is present as the reference of an other to the thing in itself, but this other is nothing that subsists on its own, but is only a reference to the thing in itself. But at the same time, it is only in being repelled from it. Thus, it is the unsupported rebound of itself within itself. Now, since the thing in itself is the essential identity of the concrete existence, this essenceless reflection does not accrue to it, but collapses within itself externally to it. It founders to the ground, and thus itself comes to be essential identity or thing in itself. This can also be looked at in this way. The essenceless concrete existence has the thing in itself, its reflection into itself. It refers to it in the first place as to its other, but as the other over against that which it is in itself. It is only the sublation of itself, and its coming to be in the in itself. The thing in itself is thus identical with external concrete existence. This is exhibited in the thing in itself as follows. The thing in itself is self-referring, essential concrete existence. It is self-identity only insofar as it holds negativity's reflection in itself, that which appeared as concrete existence external to it, consequently, a moment in it. It is for this reason also self-repelling thing in itself, which thus relates itself to itself as to another. Hence, there are now a plurality of things in themselves, standing in the reciprocal reference of external reflection. This unessential concrete existence is the reciprocal relation as others, but it is, further, also essential to them, or, in other words, this unessential concrete existence, in collapsing internally, is thing in itself, but a thing in itself which is other than the first, for that first is immediate essentiality, whereas the present proceeds from the unessential concrete existence. But this other thing in itself is only an other in general, for as self-identical thing, it has no further determinateness vis-a-vis the first. Like the first, it is the reflection within itself of the unessential concrete existence. The determinateness of the various things in themselves over against one another falls, therefore, into external reflection. 3. This external reflection is henceforth a relating of the things in themselves to one another, their reciprocal mediation as others. The things in themselves are thus the extreme terms of a syllogism, the middle term of which is made up by their external concrete existence. The concrete existence, by virtue of which they are other to each other and distinct. This, their difference, falls only in their connecting reference. They send determinations, as it were, from their surface into the reference, while remaining themselves indifferent to it. This relation now constitutes the totality of the concrete existence. The thing in itself is drawn into a reflection, external to it, in which it has a manifold of determinations. This is the repelling of itself from itself into another thing in itself, a repelling which is its rebounding back into itself, for each thing in itself is an other only as reflected back from the other. It has its supposition not in itself, but in the other, is determined only through the determinateness of the other. This other is two things in themselves, since each has its difference, not in it, but in the other, are not therefore distinct things. The thing in itself, in relating as it should to the other extreme as to another thing in itself, relates to it as something non-distinguished from it, and the external reflection that should constitute the mediating reference between the extremes is a relation of the thing in itself only to itself, or is essentially its reflection within itself. The reflection is, therefore, determinateness existing in itself, or the determinateness of the thing in itself. The latter, therefore, does not have this determinateness in the reference external to it, just another thing in itself, and of this other to it, the determinateness is not just its surface, but is rather the essential mediation of itself as with another. The two things in themselves that should constitute the extremes of the reference, since they are supposed not to have any contrasting determinateness, collapse in fact into one. It is only one thing in itself that relates itself to itself in the external reflection, and it is its own reference to itself as to another that constitutes its determinateness. This determinateness of the thing in itself is the property of the thing. B. Property. Quality is the immediate determinateness of something, the negative itself by virtue of which being is something. The property of the thing is, for its part, the negativity of reflection, by virtue of which concrete existence in general is a concrete existent, and, as simple self-identity, is thing in itself. But the negativity of reflection, the sublated mediation, is itself essentially mediation and reference, though not to another in general, like quality, which is not reflected determinateness. It is rather reference to itself as to another, or mediation, which immediately is, no less, self-identity. The abstract thing in itself is itself this relation, which turns from another back to itself. It is thereby determined in itself. But its determinateness is constitution, which is as such itself determination. And in relating to the other, it does not pass over into otherness, and is excluded from alteration. A thing has properties. These are, first, its determinate references to something other. The property is there only as a way of reciprocal relating. It is, therefore, the external reflection of the thing, and the side of its positiveness. But second, in this positiveness, the thing is in itself. It maintains itself in its reference to the other, and thus is admittedly only a surface where the concrete existence is exposed to the becoming of being and to alteration. The property is not lost in this. A thing has the property to affect this or that in another, and in this connection to express itself in some characteristic way. It demonstrates this property only under the condition that another thing has a corresponding constitution, but at the same time, the property is characteristically the thing's own and is self-identical substrate. For this reason, this reflected quality is called property. The thing thereby passes over into an externality, but the property maintains itself in this transition. Through its properties, the thing becomes cause, and to be a cause is this, to preserve itself as effect. However, the thing is here still the static thing of many properties. It has not yet determined as actual cause. It is, so far, only the reflection of its determinations immediately existing in itself, not yet itself the reflection that posits them. Essentially, therefore, the thing in itself has just shown itself to be the thing in itself, not only in such a way that its properties are the positiveness of an external reflection. On the contrary, those properties are its own determinations by virtue of which it relates in some determinate matter. It is not an indeterminate substrate located on the other side of its external concrete existence, but is present in its properties rather as ground. That is to say, it is self-identity in its positiveness. But, at the same time, it is conditioned ground. That is to say, its positiveness is equally reflection external to itself. It is reflected into itself and in itself only to the extent that it is external. Through concrete existence, the thing in itself enters into external references, and the concrete existence consists precisely in this externality. It is the immediacy of being, and because of that, the thing is subjected to alteration. But it is also the reflected immediacy of the ground, hence the thing in itself in its alteration. This mention of the ground connection is not, however, to be taken here as if the thing in general were determined as the ground of its properties. thinghood itself is. As such, the ground connection, the property, is not distinguished from its ground, nor does it constitute just the positiveness, but is rather the ground that has passed over into its externality, and is consequently truly reflected into itself. The property is itself, as such, the ground, implicitly existent positiveness, it is the ground. In other words, that constitutes the form of the property's identity, and the property's determinateness is the self-external reflection of the ground. The whole is the ground, which is in its repelling and determining, in its external immediacy, refers to itself. The thing in itself, thus, concretely exists essentially. And that it concretely exists essentially means, conversely, that concrete existence, as an external immediacy, is at the same time in its selfness. Remark. Mention was already made above of the thing in itself, in connection with the moment of immediate existence, of being in itself, and it was then remarked that the thing in itself is, as such, nothing, but the empty abstraction of all determinateness, of which nothing can of course be known, just because it is supposed to be the abstraction of all determination. Once the thing in itself has been presupposed in this way, all determination falls outside it into an alien reflection, to which it is indifferent. For transcendental idealism, this external reflection is consciousness. Now, on this standpoint, because this philosophical system relegates to consciousness every determinateness of things, both according to form and content, it falls in me, in the subject, whether I see the leaves of a tree not as black but green, the sun is round and not square, whether I taste sugar as sweet and not bitter, or again, whether I determine that the first and the second stroke of a clock are successive and not simultaneous, or that the first is cause and not effect, etc. This crude display of subjective idealism is directly contradicted by the consciousness of the freedom in accordance with which I know myself as rather the universal and indeterminate, and I separate off from myself those manifold and necessary determinations, recognizing them to be something external to me and pertaining only to things. And this consciousness of its freedom, the I, is to itself the true internally reflected identity, which the thing in itself was supposed to be. I have shown elsewhere that the transcendental idealism does not escape from the restriction of the I by the object in general, that it does not escape from the finite world, but that it only alters the form of the restriction, which remains absolute to it. This it does by simply transposing it from an objective to a subjective shape, by turning it into determinacies of the I, into an unruly alternation of these that occurs within the I, as if this were a thing. The kind of thing which, for ordinary consciousness, is a manifold of determinacies and alterations only pertaining to things outside it. In the present treatment, only the thing in itself and the reflection at first external to it stand opposed. The latter has not yet determined itself as consciousness, nor the thing in itself as I. What has resulted from the nature of the thing in itself and of the external reflection is that this same externality determines itself to be the thing in itself, or, conversely, that it becomes the determination belonging to that first thing in itself. The inadequacy, now, of the standpoint at which the philosophy remains fixed consists, essentially, in its holding on to the abstract thing in itself, as to an ultimate determination, or in opposing the determinateness and manifoldness of the properties to the thing in itself. Whereas the latter, in fact, possesses that external reflection essentially within it, and determines itself as one endowed with determinations that are its own, with properties, in this way demonstrating that the abstraction of the thing as a pure thing in itself is an untrue determination. C. The reciprocal action of things. The thing in itself exists in concreto by essence. External immediacy and determinateness belong to its being in itself, or to its immanent reflection. The thing in itself is thus a thing that has properties, and hence there are a number of things distinct from one another, not because of some viewpoint alien to them, but through themselves. These many diverse things stand in essential reciprocal action by virtue of their properties. The property is this reciprocal connecting reference itself, apart from which the thing is nothing. The reciprocal determination, the middle term of the things in themselves that are taken as extreme terms, indifferent to the reference connecting them, is itself the self-identical reflection, and the thing in itself, which those extremes were supposed to be. Thinghood is thus reduced to the form of indeterminate self-identity, having its essentiality only in its property. Thus, if one speaks of a thing, or of things in general, without a determinate property, then their difference is merely indifferent, quantitative. What is considered as a thing can just as well be made into a plurality of things, or be considered as a plurality of things. Their separation, or their union, is an external one. A book is a thing, and each of its pages is also a thing, and equally so every tiny piece of its pages, and so on to infinity. The determinateness, in virtue of which a thing is this thing, only, lies solely in its properties. It is through them that the thing differentiates itself from other things, for the property is the negative reflection and the differentiating. Only in its property, therefore, does the thing possess in it the difference of itself from others. This is the difference reflected into itself, by virtue of which the thing, in its positiveness, that is, in its reference to others, is equally indifferent to the other and to its reference to it. Without its properties, therefore, there is nothing that remains to the thing except the unessential compass and the external gathering of an abstract in itselfness. With this, thinghood has passed over into property. The thing, as the extreme term that exists in itself, was supposed to relate to the property, and this property to constitute the middle term between things that stand connected. But this connection is where things meet as self-repelling reflection, where they are distinguished and connected. This, their distinction and their connecting reference, is one reflection and one continuity of both. Accordingly, the things themselves fall only within this continuity, which is the property. They vanish as would-be self-subsisting extremes that would have a concrete existence outside this property. The property, which was supposed to connect these self-subsisting extremes, is therefore itself self-subsistent. The things are, on the contrary, the unessential. They are something essential only as the self-differentiating and self-referring reflection, but this is the property. The latter is in the thing, therefore, not as something sublated, not just a moment of it. On the contrary, the truth of the thing is that it is only an unessential compass, which is indeed a negative unity, but only like the one of the something, that is to say, a one which is immediate. Whereas earlier the thing was determined as an unessential compass because it was made such by an external abstraction that omits the property, this abstraction now happens through the transition of the thing in itself into the property itself. But there is now an inversion of values, for the earlier abstraction still envisaged by the abstract thing without its property as being the essential, and the property as an external determination, whereas it is the thing as such which is now reduced, through itself, to the determination of an indifferent external form of the property. The latter is, henceforth, thus freed of the indeterminate and impotent bond, which is the unity of the thing. The property is what constitutes the subsistence of the thing. It is a self-subsisting matter. Since this matter is simple continuity with itself, it only possesses at first the form of diversity. There is, therefore, a manifold of these self-subsisting matters, and the thing consists of them. B. The constitution of the thing out of matters. The transition of property into a matter, or into self-subsistent stuff, is the familiar transition performed on sensible matter by chemistry when it seeks to represent the properties of color, smell, etc. as luminous matter, coloring matter, odoriferous matter, sour, bitter matter, and so on, and when it simply assumes other, like calorific matter, electrical, magnetic matter, in the conviction that it has thereby gotten hold of properties as they truly are. Equally current is the saying that things consist of various matters or stuffs. One is careful about calling these matters or stuffs things, even though one will readily admit that, for example, a pigment is a thing. But I do not know whether luminous matter, for instance, or calorific matter, or electrical matter, etc., are called things. The distinction is made between things and their components without any exact statement as to whether these components also, and to what extent, are things, or perhaps just have things. But they are at least concretes in general. The necessity of making the transition from properties to matters, or of assuming that the properties are truly matters, has resulted from the fact that they are what is the essential in things, and consequently their true self-subsistence. At the same time, however, the reflection of the property into itself constitutes only one side of the whole reflection, namely, the sublation of the distinction and the continuity of the property, which was supposed to be a concrete existence for another, with itself. Thinghood, as immanent negative reflection, and as a distinguishing that repels itself from the other, has consequently been reduced to an unessential moment. At the same time, however, it has further determined itself. First, this negative moment has preserved itself, for property has become a matter continuous with itself, and self-subsisting only inasmuch as the difference of things has sublated itself. Thus, the continuity of the property in the otherness itself contains the moment of the negative, and, as this negative unity, its self-subsistence is, at the same time, the restored something of thinghood, negative self-subsistence versus the positive self-subsistence of the stuff. Second, the thing has thereby progressed from its indeterminacy to full determinateness. As thing in itself, it is abstract identity, simple negative concrete existence, or this concrete existence determined as the indeterminate. It is then determined through its properties, by virtue of which it is supposed to be distinguished from other things. But, since through the property the thing is rather continuous with other things, this imperfect distinction is sublated. The thing has thereby returned into itself and is now determined as determined. It is determined in itself, or is this thing. But, third, this turning back into itself, though a self-referring determination, is at the same time an unessential determination. The self-continuous subsistence makes up the self-subsistent matter, in which the difference of things, their determinateness existing in and for itself, is sublated and is something external. Therefore, although the thing as this thing is complete determinateness, this determinateness is such in the element inessentiality. Considered from the side of the movement of the property, this result follows in this way. The property is not only external determination, but concrete existence immediately existing in itself. The unity of externality and essentiality repels itself from itself, for it contains reflection into itself and reflection into another, and on the one hand, it is determination as simple, self-identical, and self-referring, self-subsistent, in which the negative unity, the one of the thing, is sublated. On the other hand, it is this determination over against an other, and likewise, as a one, which is reflected into itself and is determined in itself. It is therefore the matters and this thing. These are the two moments of self-identical externality, or of property reflected into itself. The property was that by which things were supposed to be distinguished, since the thing has freed itself of its negative side of inhering in another. It has thereby also become free from its being determined by other things, and has returned into itself from the reference connecting it to the other. At the same time, however, it is only the thing in itself now become the other of itself, for the manifold properties on their part have become self-subsistent, and their negative connection in one of the thing is now only a sublated connection. Consequently, the thing is a self-identical negation only as against the positive continuity of the material. The this thus constitutes the complete determinateness of the thing, a determinateness which is at the same time an external determinateness. The thing consists of self-subsistent matters, indifferent to the connection they have in the thing. This connection is therefore only an unessential linking of them, the difference of one thing from another, depending on whether there is in it a more or less of particular matters, and in which amount. These matters overrun this thing, continue into others, and that they belong to this thing is no restriction for them. Just as little are they, moreover, a restriction for one another. For their negative connection is only the impotent this. Hence, in being linked together in it, they do not sublate themselves. They are as self-subsistent, impenetrable to each other. In their determinateness, they refer only to themselves and are a mutually indifferent manifold of subsistence. The only limit of which they are incapable is a quantitative one. The thing, as this, is just their merely quantitative connection, a mere collection. There also. The thing consists of some quantum or other of a matter, also the quantum of another, and also of yet another. This combination of not having any combination alone constitutes the thing. C. Dissolution of the thing. This thing, in the manner it has determined itself as the merely quantitative combination of free matters, is the absolutely alterable. Its alteration consists in one or more matters being dropped from the collection, or being added to this also, or in the rearrangement of the matter's respective quantitative ratio. The coming to be and the passing away of this thing is the external dissolution of an external bond, or the binding of such for which it is indifferent whether they are bound or not. The stuffs circulate unchecked in or out of this thing, and the thing itself is absolute porosity, without measure or form of its own. So the thing, in the absolute determinateness through which it is a this, is the absolute dissoluble thing. This dissolution is an external process of being determined, just like the being of the thing. But its dissolution and the externality of its being is the essential of this being. The thing is only the also. It consists only of this externality, but it consists also of its matters, and not just the abstract this, but as such, but the this thing whole is the dissolution of itself. For the thing is determined as an external collection of self-subsisting matters. Such matters are not things. They lack negative self-subsistence. It is the properties which are rather self-subsistent, that is to say, are determined with a being which, as such, is reflected into itself. Hence, the matters are indeed simple, referring only to themselves, but it is their content which is the determinateness. The immanent reflection is only the form of this content. A content which is not, as such, reflected into itself, but refers to another according to its determinateness. The thing, therefore, is not only their also, is not their reference to each other as indifferent, but is, on the contrary, equally so their negative reference. And on account of this, of their determinateness, the matters are themselves this negative reflection which is the puncticity of the thing. The one matter is not what the other is according to the determinateness of the content as contrasted to that of another, and the one is not to the extent that the other is, in accordance with their self-subsistence. The thing is, therefore, the connecting reference of the matters of which it consists to each other, in such a manner that in one matter and the other also subsist in it, and yet, at the same time, the one matter does not subsist in it so far as the other does. To the extent, therefore, that the one matter it is in the thing, the other is thereby sublated, but the thing is at the same time the also, or the subsistence of the other matter. In the subsistence of the one matter, therefore, the other matter does not subsist, and it also no less subsists in it. And so, with all these diverse matters, in respect to each other, since it is thus in the same respect as the one matter subsists, that the other subsists also, and this one subsistence of both is the puncticity, or the negative unity of the thing, the two interpenetrate absolutely. And since the thing is at the same time only the also of the matters, and these are reflected into their determinateness, they are indifferent to one another, and in interpenetrating, they do not touch. The matters are, therefore, essentially porous, so that the one subsists in the pores, or in the non-subsistence of the others. But these others are themselves porous. In their pores, or their non-subsistence, the first and also all the rest subsist. Their subsistence is at the same time their sublatedness and the subsistence of others. And this subsistence of the others is just as much their sublatedness and the subsisting of the first, and equally so of all the others. The thing is therefore the self-contradictory mediation of independent self-subsistence through its opposite, that is to say, through its negation, or of one self-subsisting matter through the subsisting and non-subsisting of another. In this thing, concrete existence has attained its completion, namely, that it is at once being that exists in itself, or independent subsistence, and unessential concrete existence. The truth of concrete existence is thus this, that it has its in itself in unessentiality, or that it subsists in another, indeed in the absolute other, or that it has its own nothingness for substrat. It is therefore appearance. Remark. It is one of the commonest assumptions of ordinary thinking that a thing consists of many self-subsisting matters. On the one hand, the thing is treated as having properties. The thing is their substance. But on the other hand, these different determinations are regarded as matters, and their subsistence is not the thing. On the contrary, the converse is the case. It is the thing, rather, that consists of them, and it is only itself, only in their external bond and quantitative limit. Both the properties and the matters are the same content determinations, except that in the former case, these determinations are moments reflected into their negative unity, which is a substrate distinct from them, the thinghood. Whereas in the latter case, they are a variety of self-subsistent matters, each reflected into its own self-unity. These matters are now further determined as independent subsistence, but they are also together in a thing. This thing has the two determinations, first, of being a this, and second, of being the also. The also is represented in external intuition as spatial extension, the this. The negative unity is instead the puncticity of the thing. The matters are together in this puncticity, and their also, or their extension is everywhere this puncticity. For the also, as thinghood, is essentially determined also as negative unity. Therefore, where one of these matters is, in that one and same point, the other is. The thing does not have its color in one place, its aroma in another, its heat in the third, and so forth, but at the point where it is warm, there it is also colored, sour, electric, and so forth. Now, because these stuffs are not outside one another, but are in one this, they are assumed as porous, so that one stuff concretely exists in the interstices of another. But the one that occupies the interstices of the other is itself porous. Conversely, therefore, the other concretely exists in its pores. And this applies not just to this second stuff, but to a third also, and a tenth, and so forth. They are all porous, and in the interstices of each of all the others are present, just as each is present with the rest in the pores of every other. They are, therefore, an aggregate of matters that interpenetrates one into another in such a way that in penetrating the others, which is equally penetrated by them, so that each again penetrates its own penetratedness. Each is posited as its negation, and this negation is the subsistence of another. But this subsistence is just as much the negation of this other and the subsistence of the first. The well-known common excuse by which ordinary thinking evades the contradiction of an independent subsistence of many matters in one thing, or of the reciprocal indifference of these matters in their interpenetration, is that the parts and the pores are very small. Where the difference in itself, the contradiction and the negation of negation comes into play, where it ought to be conceptualized as such, ordinary thinking falls back upon external, quantitative difference. Where coming to be and passing away are concerned, it takes refuge in gradualness, and where being is the issue, in a smallness in which disappearing is reduced to imperceptibility. Contradiction to a matter of confusion, and true relation is played out in the medium of vague representation, the obscurity of which rescues the self-sublation of the relation. But when light is shone on this obscurity, it proves to be a contradiction, both subjective on the part of the representation and objective on the part of the subject matter, the elements of which are completely contained in pictorial representation itself. The latter runs into contradiction from the start for wanting, on the one hand, to hold on to perception and have before it things that have real being, and, on the other hand, for ascribing sensible existence to imperceptible things that are determined through reflection. The minute parts and the pores are at the same time supposed to be a sensible existence, and their positiveness is spoken of as if it were the same as the reality which belongs to color, heat, etc. If representation were to consider this objective fog more closely, the pores and the minute parts, it would discover in them not just a matter and also the negation of it, so that matter would be here and its negation next to it, the pore and the next to it matter again, and so forth. But that in this thing it has, in one and the same point, 1. The self-subsistent matter, 2. Its negation, or porosity, and the other self-subsistent matter, and that this porosity and the independent subsistence of the matters into one another as in one single point is a reciprocal negation and a penetration of the penetration. Recent accounts of physics regarding the expansion of steam and atmospheric air and of various kinds of gases in one another bring out with greater precision one side of the concept concerning the nature of a thing that has here come to view. They show, namely, that for example a certain volume holds just as much steam whether empty or full of atmospheric air. Also, that the various gases expand into one another in such a way that each is for the other as good as a vacuum, at least that they are not in any chemical bonding with each other. Each remains continuous with itself, uninterrupted by the other, and in penetrating the others, it remains itself indifferent to them. But the further moment in the concept of a thing is that in the this, one matter is present where another matter is, and that the penetrating matter is also penetrated at the same point, or that the self-subsistent is immediately the self-subsistence of another. This is contradictory, but the thing is nothing else but this contradiction itself. That is why it is appearance. We find in the spiritual realm a situation similar to that of these matters in the conception of forces or faculties of the soul. Spirit is of this, the negative unity in which its determinations interpenetrate, in a much more profound sense. But represented as soul, it is commonly taken as a thing. Just as the human being, in general, is made to consist of soul and body, each of which is taken as something subsisting of its own, so also the soul is made to consist of the so-called soul forces, each of which has a self-subsistence of its own, or is an activity with direct effects specifically its own. The assumption is that the understanding operates on its own here, the imagination there. That one can cultivate the understanding, the memory, etc., each for itself, leaving the others aside for the time being, until, perhaps, their turn comes up, or perhaps not. Although the faculties, since they are transposed into a material simple soul thing, which, as simple, is allegedly immaterial, are not portrayed as particular matters, as forces. They are nevertheless equally assumed to be indifferent to one another, just like those matters. But spirit is not the contradiction that the thing is, which dissolves itself and passes over into appearance. Rather, it already is within it the contradiction that has returned to its absolute unity, namely, into the concept. The differences are no longer to be thought in it as self-subsistent, but only as particular moments of the subject, the simple individuality. And that is going to bring us to the end of, what is this called? Appearance and Concrete Existence. Hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment, not too much confusion. I didn't have a whole lot to add, so I couldn't have, right? I understand I have some unconventional beliefs and a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. This was one more about me learning right now. The concept is to bring up the lighter again, right? We have the lighter. The essence of the lighter is that it lights fires. This is a concrete lighter. It actually exists. It is a thing made up of smaller parts, right? The smaller parts is the wheel of steel, and there's a flint inside there. There's a spring. There's a little plastic lever that lets out the gas. There is a chamber that contains the gas. All of these are the porous parts, right? They bleed into one another as the essential that is the lighter. Now, the essential part is that it lights fires. All the other parts are simple determinations. This one has a wheel and a spark. This one has a crystal and a click, right? These are two different kinds of lighters, but they are both lighters. They are determined by the moments that separate them. This one has a steel, this one has a crystal. Those are moments, determinations, separating lighter from lighter. They're both lighters. They both serve the same function, but they are porous and they're different pieces. Now, the pieces are what make them into a thing, as opposed to the concept of a lighter, which lights fires. It is an actual thing which lights fires. That seems to be the best way to say what all of this was, but I would have to read through this again to make sure that I am given the accurate, right? Some of these are really simple to me. They're self-obvious, and so when I extrapolate upon them, I am merely doing the thing that I'm seeing when I'm reading it, right? I immediately relate it. Some of them it is not so much. Some of them I do need a little bit more time to speculate upon, and so I'm not trying to interrupt on things that aren't self-evident. Hopefully that's a little bit clear. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me read or discuss, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider a membership or picking up a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.